Salutations all. Juiciest slice here with something a little different than my usual fare. For obvious reasons, the Halloween season is my favorite time of the year, when I can grow out my demon horns without judgment. Even with an industrial strength grinder, I can't tell you how much time it takes to keep these things ground down. Fine, I have long hair to hide the nubs, are you happy? You don't even want to know what the beard hides. Anywho, in honor of Halloween, I thought I might regale anyone interested with those instances in horror that haunted my waking mind and plagued my dreams. The stuff that freaked me out, shocked and terrified me, and maybe even led to a few lifelong neuroses, phobias, and what have you. So, I have my pumpkins. There's something wrong. I know, just a sec. This needs to be remedied. That's better. Now, I'm not ashamed admitting that I was a solemn kid who took horror movies dead seriously, even if they were intended to be comedic. So not all of these may be as psyche-scarring as things I've seen in my adult life. Serbian film. But all of these had a major impact on me, and though they frightened me, gave me the willies, or made me feel sick, they stoked my ever-expanding interest in horror. I basically sought out anything genre-related, even if it frightened me beyond belief. I was maybe seeking immunity through exposure because I was a child beset by many fears, real and imagined. If that's the case, it must have worked. These days I've gotten over my irrational fears. Well, most of them. The Universal horror films would show on TV during weekend afternoons. A perfect time for a scaredy cat kid around the age of 5 to watch scary movies, in the bright sunshine. As much as the Frankenstein monster's death by burning bothered me, poor misunderstood Lug just wanted love and acceptance when he couldn't even comprehend what those things were. But the thing that got me most out of all those films was Kay swimming around blithely, completely oblivious of the Gill-man's proximity. I watched with bated breath. Terrified for Kay. The Jaws series made me leery of the ocean, but I lived in Minnesota, so little worry of shark attack. However, my summers were spent swimming in lakes and rivers, and though the Gill-man was in the Amazon, to my imagination such a creature could exist anywhere. It made me maybe a little too paranoid of the water.
I scream exactly the same if a great white is gonna attack me, or if a piece of seaweed touches my foot.
To be fair, with snapping turtles and northern pike with massive teeth lurking, dangers were present, but it was the Gill-man I would imagine reaching up and seizing my ankle. That or a relative of the Loch Ness Monster. I was maybe 10 when a friend introduced me to it during a sleepover. His family recorded the 2 parts onto one tape when it aired. I'd never heard of it, so I went in cold, knowing only it was a Stephen King movie. So a jolly little kid chases a boat. And down a storm drain it goes. Only for there to be a clown down there, too.
Hi, Georgie.
The clown proves loquacious.
I, Georgie, am Pennywise, the dancing clown.
And rather charming.
You are Georgie. So now we know each other.
Only for this turn of events to smack me in the head. To say I was shell-shocked would be like saying the Grand Canyon is a small hole in the American Southwest. Even after seeing Poltergeist, I didn't find clowns scary, but this monster in the guise of a clown was terrifying. First off, I lived out in the country, so my knowledge of sewers came from alligator urban legends, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and Jason Takes Manhattan. And this was the first time I ever considered something could instigate contact with me from a storm drain. And from that point forward, I always eyed them suspiciously. Since Georgie's death happens early on, it set the stage for quite a viewing experience. That was a tense 4 hours in the dead of night. On a side note, Tim Curry is a legend, and I'd gladly fistfight anybody who would want to argue otherwise.
Fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me.
This catter puppy thing?
Just get him off! He's in my leg!
Is the all-time scariest creature I've ever encountered.
Charlie!
Absolutely terrifying. Kidding, of course. The catter puppy is one of many elements from House 2 that makes me feel like everyone should watch that movie at least once. It's a hoot. Anywho, House, the tale of a Vietnam vet turned horror writer living in his dead aunt's haunted abode, isn't the scariest fright flick. In fact, besides a few possible jump scares, I would call it horror light, leaning on comedic elements over disturbing ones. But one of the jump scares, in a dream sequence of all things, altered my cemetery visits for the rest of my childhood, as I would always imagine this. Never visiting one. It's a quick blip in the film, but it had a heck of an impact. I remember the movie was showing on regular TV and I was watching alone in my room and bam! It got me good, like I had to jump under the covers. And the House series went to the top of my list of flicks I had to see. I even got my parents on board and they watched them with me. Since it was released under the title The Horror Show in our area, we never did see House 3 back then, and I wouldn't see it until recent years. I would say House is a fairly strong series, but Part 4 is a little iffy. The Thing may be one of my all-time favorites today. Like, I would say it's truly one of the best horror films ever made. But when my bio dad showed it to me before the age of 5, I was probably 3, it's one of my earliest memories. It horrified me beyond belief, and nothing bothered me more than this horrendousness. I might have cried. I don't remember entirely. But I know I didn't understand any of it, such as that this was sparing the dog from a worse fate. All I knew was dogs were suffering. This all bothered me horribly. Like I would lie in bed at night thinking of this stuff and cry. Sad, I know. Funnily, around the same time, my dad also showed me My Bloody Valentine, a fairly rough slasher. And that one didn't present anything so disturbing that I carried it with me beyond a memory. It wasn't until I rewatched The Thing as a teen with a better understanding of the goings-ons that I was able to get over the profound sadness. And like I said, now I can't compliment The Thing enough. So all's well that ends well, I guess. I recently had the pleasure of meeting Tom Matthews, Tommy Jarvis, and Jason Lives, and the experience heightened what was already a great love for the film. I now have a hockey mask signed to me by Mr. Matthews that says Jason belongs in hell. So that's pretty cool. Even though the earlier entries in the series were overall scarier due to their darker tone and concealment of Jason and Mrs. Voorhees until the end, this one had what I consider an excellent example of powerlessness in the face of a great force, and as a kid it freaked me out tremendously. Sheriff Garris isn't the most likable guy. But his willingness to lay down his life for his daughter redeems him completely. He had to know the risk, yet he took on Jason. Only to fail spectacularly by not utilizing proper proximity. Allowing Jason to get his hands on him. The thought of getting my back snapped like that has always made me cringe. Ugh, just the total inability to fight back was so terrifying. At least there was some fantastic humor that helped. This... and this...
real dead meat.
So, what were you gonna be when you grew up?
among other things, have always given me a great chuckle. A Nightmare on Elm Street 3: The Dream Warriors probably didn't scare me as much as it should have, especially since I saw it around 6. Maybe since in a lot of ways it's just a lot of fun and Freddy's like a murderous jester. but it does have an element that gives me the heebie-jeebies even now. Phillip likes to make puppets, so, of course, Freddy has to make him into one, starting with some cuts. And culminating in... For me, this whole pulling out the tendons bit has always been disgustingly shudder-inducing for going on 35 years. Just ugh. And since I'm talking about the heebie-jeebies, I need to give an honorable mention to this scene from A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge.
You've got the body. I've got the brain.
Now, I knew there's obviously skull protecting my brain, but I can't tell you how much I turned it over in my noodle. Considering the ramifications of not having proper skull protection. Kind of funny now since I could always do this and know I was good.
I love soul food. No! Stop!
What a time the 1980s were, when a movie like Poltergeist with nothing more than Steven Spielberg's name could get a PG rating. This before he suggested PG-13 to the MPAA because the rules as they stood meant they had no choice other than to give Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom an R, and they were like, whatever you need, Mr. Spielberg. This movie's wild. I could talk about Carol Ann getting taken to the other side, or the toy clown attacking Robbie, or the terrifying tree, or the ghost assault on Diane, or the coffins and skeletons bursting up out of the ground. But the thing that got me was what happened to one of the parapsychologists. First off, the man's snack comes under attack. A real appetite killer. And then him, when the poltergeist wreak havoc on his mind in what I consider a highly disturbing sequence. Not to be triggering, but self-harm, especially to this level of mutilation, gets me to my core. The practical effects might not seem seamless today, but as a kid, it achieved a gut-wrenching, stomach-churning level of realism. Sometimes just the concept of a film was enough to terrify me. From Return of the Living Dead, another flick that got me good even though it didn't make this particular list, I learned about the original Night of the Living Dead, cluing me into the idea of a zombie apocalypse. The very notion of undead people trying to bust in and eat me was literally almost too much to bear. Sure, zombies were pretend, but what if they were real? Actually, seeing the original film was so much worse because it took place in a rural farmhouse, kind of like my living situation. Witnessing the survivors fail to defend the house. Oh my God. The horror of it. Was almost too much to bear. I drew up detailed plans of how to secure my house in case of such an event. Being eaten alive by zombies is one way I definitely don't want to go out. Also, in the who's right, Cooper or Ben argument,
Go ahead. Go ahead. You want to stay up here now?
in my opinion, Cooper was proven right. But I also feel like that could only be determined in retrospect since the situation wasn't one that led to obvious solutions. But the group probably would have survived if they had chosen to hole up in the basement per Cooper's insistence. Sorry, Ben. When I was maybe 6 or 7, my parents took me to a birthday party for the daughter of some of their friends. She was a year older than me and we never really jibed, so I just wandered around the apartment looking forward to when I got to go home. At some point, a group of screaming kids came sputtering out from the back room, piquing my curiosity. And not realizing the adults of this household were much more permissive, I walked in on this. Such heinousness at once repelled and enticed, and I watched as long as I could. Probably until it was time for cake. To me, at that age, it was almost like a documentary chronicling insanity. Without context, I was so confused. I turned it over in my head so many times. For some years afterwards, I wondered just what I'd watched. With no title to go along with my experience, I was stymied for years. It wouldn't be until the popularity of Army of Darkness among my peers led to The Evil Dead that the mystery was solved, and many of my questions answered. I would rate it as one of the great revelations of my life. I've always considered The Shining a savvy film that may in some way disregard the book on which it's based, but in so doing emerges as a distinct and unique telling of the story that still manages to be a solid horror flick. The twins... forget about it.
Come and play with us, Daddy.
Terrifying stuff.
Forever and ever.
But what scared me the most, this lady here. This is all I can show because there's full frontal nudity in this, some pleasant enough, some horrifyingly repulsive. I think the seduction angle followed by the reveal of the crone combined with Jack's quickness to cheat on Wendy, I mean he doesn't even give it a second thought, but that may be the influence of the Overlook, added up to make this not only a terrifying scene, but one that was emotionally convoluted. All I know is that it creeped me out and confused me in turns. As I've stated before, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is my favorite horror film, and this may be the biggest reason why. Leatherface capturing Pam, carrying her kicking and screaming down the hallway, and giving her the meat hook treatment, wasn't so much psychologically traumatizing as psychologically manipulating. Why do I say that? I remembered this as so much gorier than it is, that when I saw it again as a teen I thought it was a truncated version. I would learn that was not so. It was the scene as I had seen it, only it was so effective on me at the time, I to this day have a memory of the hook bursting through her chest, apparently manufactured by my own mind. Not too many horror films have tricked me into seeing outrageous effects that aren't on the screen. For a while before I figured out the truth I was angry. Like, why can't I find the right version of the film? I wanted to see that again. I guess the joke was on me and anyone else who thought they saw a lot more than actually happened. Nothing thrilled me more than a trip to the video store. I was a videocassette junkie. I loved looking through the boxes. Of course, the horror section became my favorite area to peruse. I loved all the creepy box art. I would learn how misleading it could be, but early on I was undaunted and was sure everything was awesome. Taken in by self-reflexive meta elements long before we had any idea what those things were, my best friend at the time and I gravitated to Sleepaway Camp 2. Because basically the hockey mask and the Freddy glove convinced us it had to be great, which meant we had to see the first one too. My friend was able to get a copy, and during a sleepover we watched it late into the night, totally unaware of what was up, that we were in for one of horror's greatest turns. A turn being bigger than a twist because it makes you rethink every aspect of the entire film. Spoiler alert, at the end we learn that the quiet girl Angela is the killer. And is actually Peter.
A little girl would be so much nicer, don't you think so, Angela?
Forced to live as a female by his kooky aunt after his parents' death, because she already had a boy child. The reveal itself is something else. Angela stands up nude, exposing the truth. What got me was the killer's demented face, not so much Felissa Rose's, but the young man they put in the Felissa Rose mask to reveal the penis. That night, I ended up having a crazy nightmare in which naked Angela brandishing a butcher knife chased me up and down the beach, face like this. The whole time. I woke in a cold sweat, and I remember it took me a long time laying there in the dark to reconcile the nightmare and separate it from reality. Weirdly, the penis was immaterial. It was that face, the crazy bizarro face. The effect is fair for the era, but there's an offness to it that makes it extra disconcerting, especially since it happens and bing bang boom the film ends and you're left in the wake of the reveal, that peculiar face scorched on your brain. In my case, the movie ended and my friend and I hunkered down and went to sleep. I guess with that face dancing around my mind, it's no wonder I wound up having such a crazy and wild nightmare. Oddly, I've had a crush on Felissa Rose ever since, and I love when she shows up in a movie. Check her out in Victor Crowley. Her character is hilarious.
Angela. Such a lovely name.
Sometimes you see something that goes with you forever. It can be something good, like a beautiful sunset on an autumn day, or bad, like a dirty secret kept in a back room. In the case of Zelda,
Was a dirty secret. I had to...
it was bad. This single scene maybe caused the most unreasonable terror of anything in my whole life. Look at her there on the bed, all skeletal and sickly looking.
I had to feed her sometimes. I hated it. But I did it.
The initial sight of her stopped me dead.
And they'll say I murdered her by choking. They'll say you hated her, Rachel, and that was true.
I could hardly look upon the emaciated form.
She started to look like this monster. Even now, I wake up and I think, is Zelda dead yet?
I could scarcely breathe.
And they'll say you wanted her to be dead, and that was true too.
I felt poleaxed and gobsmacked. To be fair, the visceral impact may have been rooted in the circumstances of my life at the time. My family moved in with our elderly relatives on the farm to save them from going to a nursing home. My great-great-aunt ended up suffering a stroke shortly after the unexpected passing of her brother in a traffic accident. My beloved aunt was never herself again and suffered partial paralysis, necessitating she spend a lot of time in bed. Though she was never considered or treated like a dirty secret, it still meant an out-of-her-mind stranger was confined to the bed in the back room. Thankfully, she was an elderly woman and not an overly thin monstrosity. As it was, my emotions were in a bit of a tizzy, having just lost my favorite uncle to a vehicle collision and then who my aunt was to a stroke, so I wonder if Zelda represented a lot more than horrific imagery. At the back of our basement, under the stairs, there was a small aperture where the water pump was located. For years, no matter how irrational it was, every time I went down in the basement I imagined Zelda coming out from the opening. As I climbed the stairs, I scurried as fast as possible, feeling like her bony hand was about to seize my ankle. This persisted into my teens. Not to toot my own horn, but after dealing with some pretty harsh bullying, I was raised to be a pacifist, to turn the other cheek. Go figure, such a stance only perpetuated my torment. I fashioned myself into a scary person. I lifted weights, ran, rode bike, and hit the punching and speed bags. I learned to fight through mixed martial arts. I was a very early fan of the UFC, and started standing up for myself, which occasionally led to fisticuffs. Seeing as how a single blow can cause insane damage, even death, I feel fortunate neither me nor my opponents ever got seriously damaged. Some of these guys were scary dudes, but I never feared another human being like I did Zelda. So I'm dealing with actual physical threats, but I was still afraid of the basement. It was terrible. I thought if I saw Zelda again when I was older, she wouldn't be so bad. Ha! By the time I reached adulthood, the irrational fears dwindled and the basement no longer inspired such terror, but it was still difficult to look at Zelda without getting a lump in my throat. It wasn't until I watched an interview with the young man who played Zelda that she stopped bothering me. That was probably in my late 20s. Now I'm able to think of him and see the performance. But there's no changing the facts. Zelda haunted my mind, filling me with chills for years.
Never get out of bed again! Never get out of bed again!
So there you go. 13 horror scenes that got me good. These were just the ones that came instantly to mind. As I worked on this, it became apparent I could come up with another whole list, so maybe I'll revisit this theme next year. As for those that made the list, even though I knew logically none of these things were real, my imagination was always a bit of an unrelenting monster itself, and imagery has always burst into my mind like Jason. Despite all my terror, what kept me coming back? Love of being taken on a scary journey, of being exposed to different realities, and a general desire to know if I could take it, to know if I was strong enough. A lot of times I wasn't strong enough. I had to look away or pull the covers over my head or hit the stop button for a break. But it was fun. Maybe it just comes down to
Some folks have a strange idea of entertainment.
if you've made it this far, thanks for humoring my ramblings and joining me for my little Halloween special. Please share the scenes that got to you. I'd love to find out what freaked you out. And please join me next time when I talk about a film I consider weird, Joel Schumacher's 1999 Spiral into the World of Snuff 8mm. Happy Halloween!